Families across Texas walked into Walmart, H-E-B, Costco, and Kroger expecting dinner, not danger. Yet tonight, the shelves tell a different story. Behind the shiny labels of ground beef, chicken, ham, bacon, and hot dogs, federal inspectors uncovered what no one wants on their plate. E. coli, salmonella, and Listeria contaminations, powerful enough to trigger an urgent Class 1 recall. What if the meat you already served at home is part of it? This isn't just about stores pulling products. It's about hidden risks in the very chains millions trust. Part 1. Red Flag State, First Wave of Pulls. However, the calm voice behind those alerts matters as much as the siren, because when the United States Department of Agriculture's Food Safety and Inspection Service declares a Class 1 recall, it means there is a reasonable probability that eating the food will cause serious health consequences or death. While the Food and Drug Administration covers most other foods and posts public notices with establishment numbers and lot codes that trace every route home, and the code on your label tells the story. Meanwhile, the geography of the problem is not a headline but a map, because one processor can ship identical lots under different private labels to regional distribution centers in Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, and beyond, and cross-docking disperses pallets so widely that a single production run can touch dozens of towns by morning, yet the sticker never boasts about the route it took. In one pallet, dozens of towns. Same risk. By the way, you'll never know what's really hidden in your plate at chains like these. Subscribe now and protect yourself before your next bite. But the most surprising thing is how the meat that feels most familiar can carry the highest stakes, because ground beef mixes trim from many carcasses into one blend and turns a single error into a networked exposure. And E. coli O157:H7 thrives on that math by slipping from one lot into hundreds of patties unless controls hold. Even so, the establishment code stamped as EST. Beside the inspection mark is the breadcrumb you can actually use, and when beef is ground, risk is multiplied. However, the danger rarely introduces itself at the plant, because it often appears at the grill when the center stays pink after the flames die down. And Shiga toxin-producing E. coli can incubate for 1 to 10 days before symptoms escalate from cramps to bloody diarrhea, while kids and the elderly pay first for everyone's shortcuts. As a consequence of this, the backyard can become a lab you never planned to run, and pink in the middle isn't a flex, it's a hazard. On the other hand, the second quiet culprit wears flavor like armor, because pre-marinated chicken breasts sit in trays where purge collects along the seams and leaks onto refrigerator shelves long after checkout. And salmonella does not care whether the label reads lemon pepper or garlic herb if the packaging weeps. Even so, every extra handling step during case break at the store adds one more chance to seed the problem, and that marinade bath can carry bacteria. Even so, the kitchen becomes a delivery system when gravity does its work, because drips from an upper shelf can slide into producer drawers where you never invited raw meat, and cutting boards remember yesterday's blade strokes unless a true scrub breaks the chain, while family-sized protein packs increase the time that open packages live among snacks and fruit. What many did not see coming is how the quiet path matters more than the loud brand, and gravity moves liquids and pathogens down. However, no map of the home explains why the factory keeps losing the race by minutes, because line speed decides whether sanitation wins or falls behind, and temperature abuse along a short stretch of the cold chain can undo an entire day of careful chilling before it hits the truck, while defective seals disguise themselves as perfectly fine edges until gas exchange turns protective atmospheres into invitations. As a consequence of this, third-party sanitation gaps start to look like design rather than accident, and inside the plant, time beats caution. Meanwhile, the way Texas buys food amplifies each weak link, because large family packs, weekend stock-ups, and church cookouts create long holding windows where mishandling has more room to hide. And the state's hot commutes stretch the last mile from the store to the fridge into its own test of discipline. Even so, a cooler bag in a trunk can be the difference between safe and suspect in August, and small habits decide big outcomes faster than warnings. But the most surprising thing is how the recall language itself can sound bureaucratic until you decode it, because Class 1 means immediate hazard, Class 2 signals a remote chance of serious harm, and Class 3 covers label or quality issues without known health risk, while a consumer advisory differs from a market withdrawal in whether the government or the company pushes the stop button. As a consequence of this, the phrases on a notice are not decoration but triage, and the class number sets the clock. However, notice how the store choreography gives the illusion of control, because clerks pull cases into the back and managers print signs, yet the lot already on a neighborhood's dinner plate sits beyond any aisle, and the real recall happens across kitchens that never asked to participate. Even so, the only bridge between a case in a truck and a roast in your oven is the lot code on a package you can still find, and the tiny stamp decides the path forward. On the other hand, the first wave always feels like the last, because the public only sees the products that make it to a press release, while internal complaint logs and early positives often stack up before the notice lands where you can read it, and the difference between rumor and risk is usually a calendar day and a lab result. What many did not see coming is that early removals are often only the visible edge of a wider net, and today's pulled case hints at tomorrow's list. Even so, none of this is a call to panic but to pattern spotting, because a state that eats as much meat as Texas will always be a bellwether for how fast a factory problem becomes a household story, and once the first two culprits are on the board, the remaining errors usually rhyme with them. As a consequence of this, the next chapters move from symptom to system with names you'll recognize, and Texas shelves don't go empty by accident. Part 2. Inside the plant's post-cook weak points. However, the quiet drama begins where the steam lifts off stainless steel, because on the plant floor, every minute is negotiated between throughput and cleanliness, and FSIS inspectors walking pre-op checks under 9 CFR 416 look for residue that will not show up in a press release, while production managers eye quotas that convert seconds into pallets, and faster lines slower hygiene. Meanwhile, sanitation windows sound generous on paper and brittle in practice, because overnight crews can scrub for 6 hours and still miss a shadowed elbow of a conveyor where moisture condenses above product zones, and pre-operational inspections may pass on site, while ATP swabs later reveal fluorescent traces the eye ignored. Even so, the rule says clean to site and smell before startup, and logs pass when residue remains. But the most surprising thing is that heat is not the last word, because the moment product leaves the lethality step, it enters the fragile realm FSIS calls post-lethality exposure, and any rack, glove, or blade that touches it can reintroduce what cooking just destroyed with zero tolerance for Listeria monocytogenes in ready-to-eat meat. As a consequence of this, the safest hour is the one before slicing, and the clock starts after the kill step. On the other hand, this is where pork sausages step into the story with uncomfortable clarity, because processed and flavored links often move from cookers to cooling rooms where air currents and hands multiply chance, and Listeria monocytogenes can persist and even grow at refrigerator temperatures near 39 degrees Fahrenheit, while nothing smells wrong at all. Even so, the flavor that sells adds surfaces that cling, and cold does not mean safe. Even so, racks turn from simple scaffolds into silent vectors when droplets land and linger, because stainless looks clean, while micro scratches harbor life that brushes rarely reach, and FSIS environmental sampling seeks exactly these niches, because a single positive on a post-lethality surface requires systemic corrective actions under the Listeria rule adopted in 2003. What many did not see coming is that silence in the plant is not absence, and one swab can halt a week. However, flavor complexity raises the stakes with arithmetic, because cheese inclusions, herb slurries, and sweet glazes add ingredients and touch points that each demand a hazard analysis under 9 CFR 417, and every extra funnel, tote, and scoop invents a new corner that must be washed, tested, and verified before the next shift. As a consequence of this, a premium recipe can expand the battlefield, and more taste means more gates to guard. Meanwhile, the risk does not stop at the dock when those links reach a quiet fridge, because ready-to-eat sausages can show multi-week sell-by windows, while Listeria continues growing slowly at cold temperatures that stop other pathogens. And elderly consumers and pregnant women are not reading Petri dishes when they open a package that still looks perfect. Even so, the calendar is doing its own math at 38 degrees, and time at cold can still climb. On the other hand, turkey deli slices turn the invisible into habit as soon as they meet the slicer, because biofilms on stainless steel resist casual sanitizer contact and require full disassembly to expose the seams where colonies hide. And laboratory studies have shown Listeria can form biofilms that survive routine wiping and reseed the blade the next morning. As a consequence of this, the clean shine can deceive a camera, and the slicer remembers every batch. Even so, logs can declare compliance while reality runs a different schedule, because many deli counters follow a 4-hour breakdown rule to disassemble, wash, rinse, and sanitize food contact surfaces. Yet rush periods and understaffed nights push disassembly past the mark while handwritten sheets still look tidy. What many did not see coming is that paperwork is not a disinfectant, and a missed hour can seed a day. However, the gravity of this risk falls unevenly across the population, because CDC data show pregnant women are about 10 times more likely than others to get listeriosis, and the infection can lead to miscarriage, stillbirth, or severe neonatal illness, while the elderly and immunocompromised face hospitalization rates that dwarf those of other foodborne pathogens. As a consequence of this, a thin slice carries a heavy burden, and for some, a mild risk is lethal. Meanwhile, institutions magnify the stakes when menus repeat the same item across hundreds of trays, because a single contaminated batch of deli meat can echo through a hospital ward or school district by lunch. And the 1998 multi-state listeriosis outbreak linked to hot dogs and deli meat sickened around 100 people and caused 21 deaths before the chain was broken. Even so, the past is not gone in these lines, and history repeats when systems rhyme. On the other hand, the retail layer adds an identity puzzle that matters in Texas, because private labels from discount grocers, regional chains, and national clubs can share the very same establishment behind different wrappers, and the FSIS mark with an EST number ties every packet back to its plant, no matter what brand sits on the front. As a consequence of this, the label's face can mislead the buyer, and labels do not tell the whole route. Even so, shoppers who learn from discount grocer investigations that opacity is a feature of the model will recognize the pattern here, because a store brand can be excellent one week and compromise the next depending on which processor filled the purchase order, and the 4 characters stamped beside the inspection legend will tell you more truth than any marketing line. What many did not see coming is how often names borrow reputations, and the plant code never lies. However, the life of a safe slice depends on a chain that never warms, because post-cooked turkey must cool through danger zones and stay at or below 40 degrees Fahrenheit from rack to truck to deli case. And even brief departures during staging, loading, or display create windows where Listeria gains a foothold before slipping under film to travel home. As a consequence of this, cold is not a suggestion in RTE areas, and cold chain warm risk becomes real. Meanwhile, auditors keep returning to the same weak links because the system keeps producing them, because condensation over lines, worn gaskets on vacuum pack machines, and pooled water on floors show up again and again in non-compliance reports across plants. And corrective actions only stick when maintenance, training, and schedule adjust together rather than on paper alone. Even so, the fix must outlast the shift that caused it, and repeating gaps predict repeating recalls. On the other hand, FSIS allows processors to choose among post-lethality control alternatives that combine antimicrobials, sanitation intensity, and testing frequency, because Alternative 1 demands both a post-lethality treatment and an antimicrobial agent, while Alternative 2 relies on one or the other with enhanced sampling, and Alternative 3 accepts sanitation alone with the heaviest testing burden. As a consequence of this, the chosen path defines the margin for error, and choices upstream dictate risks downstream. Even so, the story circles back to the same uncompromising truth that began in Texas aisles, because plant pressure, post-cook exposure, and shared processors explain why recalls rarely stop with the first list, and the same logic that touched sausages and turkey slices will soon trace packages that look pristine until a seal fails. What many did not see coming is how appearance buys dangerous time, and the fresh look can mask a stale truth. Part 3. Package to traps, seals, gas flush, curing. However, the story tightens the moment meat meets plastic, because the package is not a promise but a system of seams, films, headspace, and pressure that can hide trouble behind a showroom gloss. And modified atmospheres are designed to slow change rather than prevent it, while a perfect cherry red can outlive safety by days, and a fresh look can lie. Meanwhile, every seal is an engineering bet placed against time, because a form-fill seal machine must create uniform bonds while film tension, blade heat, and product moisture try to disagree, and quality teams chase microleaks with dye tests and vacuum holds that pass until the next vibration opens a channel. Even so, the failure that matters is the one a shopper cannot see, and an invisible leak becomes a visible risk. On the other hand, the gas mix that floats under the film is not magic, because processors use carbon dioxide to slow microbial growth and nitrogen to fill space, while oxygen is carefully limited, and some red meats use trace carbon monoxide as a color stabilizer that holds bloom even when quality sags. Yet none of these molecules kill pathogens or erase temperature abuse, and color is not freshness. Even so, vacuum packaging flips the equation without solving it, because drawing down headspace strips oxygen and tightens film to meat while turning a pinhole into a highway that pulls ambient air and moisture inside, and seam channels at the corners act like rivers during transport jostle. As a consequence of this, a perfect pull on day 1 can be a slow failure on day 5, and one pinhole makes many problems. However, this is the stage where Ham steps forward looking confident, because cured mussels tumbled with brine and nitrite exit the cook step as ready to eat and glide into family size packs that promise convenience for a week, while purge collects in shallow basins that look harmless until they turn cloudy under light and the shiny surface conceals a murky process. Without subscribing, the next time you sit down at a chain restaurant, you'll have no idea what risks are riding on that fork. Subscribe today or keep eating in the dark. Meanwhile, the way Ham is made multiplies tiny decisions into big outcomes, because injection patterns and tumbler speed determine brine uptake, while line speed pushes staffs to close bags faster than drip can finish, and higher pickup percentages mean more mobile liquid in the package that needs a flawless seal to stay where it belongs. Even so, the push to hit throughput can outrun controls, and faster brine means slower control. On the other hand, spoilage organisms do not announce themselves on a megaphone, because they trap gases in pockets that balloon film in a quiet dome and paint the tacky sheen that a hurried hand might miss. And off odors bloom first as a whisper when the seal peels, and then as a slap when the whole pack exhales. As a consequence of this, a puffed pack is a message you should not debate, and a ballooning bag warns. Even so, store-level practices can scramble the trail that would help you, because merchandising and markdown stickers can cover lot clusters, while case breaks move identical hams between displays with new signs, and a backroom rewrap to stop a leak rewrites the code that linked the item to its run. What many did not see coming is that a fresh label can erase a map, and rework hides the route. However, the most reliable tools still live at your fingertips and nose, because a slippery film under your touch and a sour note at opening beat any marketing claim, and the establishment code beside the inspection mark can be photographed and matched across households to reveal a cluster when the internet compares. As a consequence of this, a community can outpace a press release, and your senses beat slogans. Meanwhile, the line turns toward a product that seems bulletproof until it cracks, because hot dogs are finely emulsified blends that rely on precision grind, time, and temperature to protect texture and safety, and their smooth bite is a contract signed by many controls that fall apart when one seam loosens. Even so, the perception of being pasteurized can lull buyers into complacency, and a smooth bite hides rough risks. On the other hand, the seal around a hot dog is a narrow fortress, because form-fill sealed jaws must kiss edges together with heat, while liquid fat and brine try to keep them apart, and a weak seam plus a gas flush can give oxygen and condensation the tiny foothold they need to wake dormant life. As a consequence of this, the soft corner you feel might be the failure you cannot see, and a soft seam is a hard lesson. Even so, the last mile across a Texas summer changes math faster than any lab, because a trunk can surpass 120 degrees while errands stack and ice melts, and 10 minutes of thermal drift can undo an hour of careful chilling before the package reaches a family fridge. What many did not not see coming is that the warmest link is the one you control, and heat outruns the label. However, the emotional weight lands where the purchase lands most, because hot dogs show up at ball games, pool parties, and school fundraisers where kids eat patterns, not warnings, and frequency multiplies small risks into larger ones when a seal problem repeats across a week of events. As a consequence of this, the calendar becomes a hazard multiplier, and children repeat bites faster than alerts. Meanwhile, recall histories circle the same culprits with painful regularity, because underprocessing, seam failure, and temperature abuse return in different wrappers with the same consequences when audits find incomplete corrective actions and the language in notices changes brand names, while the cause reads like a template that could have been written last year. Even so, those patterns are a map you can learn to read, and past recalls sketch future ones. On the other hand, this packaging pressure looks familiar if you remember fast food at scale, because speed, standardization, and labor constraints carve identical fault lines whether the counter sells burgers or a plant seals dogs. And the same stopwatch that rushes a sandwich off a hotline rushes a vacuum bag out of a sealer. As a consequence of this, the setting changes while the clock does not, and a different counter keeps the same clock. Even so, none of this erases the power of small decisions that add up, because choosing a cooler bag in August, checking a seam with your thumb, and photographing an establishment code build a habit that stays useful beyond a single news cycle, and repeating those checks without panic keeps the story in your hands rather than only in a headline. What many did not see coming is how often caution looks ordinary, and ordinary habits block extraordinary problems. However, the aisle we approach next leaves the factory excuses behind and walks straight into dinner, because frozen meatballs, bacon under film, and birds on a rotisserie case look deceptively safe until temperature, smoke, and carving boards conspire. And the same motifs will reappear with sharper teeth where ready to eat meets ready right now. As a consequence of this, the next section raises the room temperature on purpose, and the next aisle hides hotter risks. Part 4. Ready to eat and home exposure, what's already on the table. However, the aisle where convenience wins is where attention must sharpen, because ready-to-eat and heat-and-eat products look like shortcuts that save the day, yet those shortcuts cross the same fault lines we have traced from plant to cart. And the moment dinner promises speed, it also asks you to notice the tiny details that decide outcomes, and dinner already on the table. Meanwhile, the first trap wears frost like armor, because frozen meatballs feel safe behind ice crystals and tidy fonts, yet post-cook positives for salmonella have shown up in retained samples when co-packed runs drift off spec, and freezer burn is not a sterilizer even when texture survives a month in the back drawer, and frozen isn't sterilized. On the other hand, the weakness hides in the reheat more than the recipe, because a microwave turns plates into weather maps where hot edges circle cold centers, and a sauce that boils at the rim can leave a barely warm core if you skip stirring, rotating, and standing time, while oven reheats can still shield the middle ball behind a brown surface, and steam hides a cold core. Even so, co-packing multiplies the footprint when one plant fills orders for many brand names at once, because a single deviation in hold time or sampling can echo across labels you think compete, and the only thread that ties them back to source is the establishment code printed in tiny type near the inspection legend. As a consequence of this, brand loyalty cannot outvote a metal stamp, and labels don't tell the whole route. However, the second trap sells aroma and weekend ritual, because bacon arrives under a tight vacuum with the promise of smoke, maple, and crisp edges. Yet inadequate curing and short smoke dwell times can leave room for surface molds to bloom under film when seams or storage go wrong, and the morning sizzle begins with last night's choices, and smoke can hide shortcuts. Meanwhile, the package will whisper before it speaks, because a faint sour waft on opening and a tacky gloss that clings to fingertips beat any marketing claim about artisanal cuts, and a slight dome across the film that springs back under your thumb is not just an aesthetic problem when gas from spoilage organisms builds quietly. As a consequence of this, your senses remain the first inspectors, and shimmer is not a safety seal. On the other hand, the hot case turns confidence into choreography, because rotisserie chicken wears a golden coat that reads comfort while thermometers drift a few degrees after months of bumps and steam and improper cook or hold temperatures turn the service counter into a stage where timing beats policy during lunch rush. Even so, a carve on a board that sliced raw parts an hour ago resets the clock backward, and ready to eat isn't risk-free. Even so, the busiest minutes are the most unforgiving because basting brushes that never see a true sanitizing break and cutting boards that only get a wipe down between birds can move contamination along with the rhythm of the line, and the difference between a safe hour and a risky one is measured in the discipline of a crew with a cue. What many did not see coming is that wood and plastic have good memories, and the board remembers every bird. However, the cold chain still writes the last act even after a safe carve, because the walk from hot case to car to kitchen can run through warm air that lingers in a Texas evening, and resting a warm chicken in a sealed container fogs the lid while condensation drips back onto skin and into seams where hands will tear. As a consequence of this, the last mile matters more than the last minute, and heat writes the final chapter. Meanwhile, the verification playbook is not complicated once you know where to look, because establishment numbers sit beside the inspection legend on meat and poultry. Lot codes and pack dates hide near seals or back panels, and FSIs and FDA portals publish recall notices that you can match to the characters in your hand. Even so, retailers maintain recall pages that mirror those notices and name which stores pulled which lots, and codes beat rumors every time. On the other hand, the next move is mechanical rather than emotional, because if a recalled item sits in your fridge, you isolate it in a clean bag, photograph the label with the EST number and lot information, and contact the store for a refund instead of improvising a taste test. While H-E-B, Walmart, Costco, and Kroger policies typically accept returns on recalls without debate, as a consequence of this, documentation replaces argument in seconds, and proof gets you resolution fast. Even so, time becomes the measure if exposure already happened, because E. coli can incubate for 1 to 10 days before severe cramps and bloody diarrhea signal real danger. Salmonella symptoms often appear within 6 to 72 hours with fever and dehydration, and Listeria can wait days to weeks while quietly climbing towards serious outcomes in the vulnerable. What many did not see coming is that calendars and clocks are diagnostic tools, and watch clocks, not guesses. However, escalation lines are simple once you map them, because persistent high fever, blood and stool, prolonged vomiting, signs of dehydration, or any symptoms in pregnancy warrant immediate medical attention, and keeping the package or a photo of its codes gives clinicians the context they need to connect symptoms to lots for reporting. As a consequence of this, evidence shortens investigations and speeds care, and documentation shortens answers. Meanwhile, safer buying pivots exist that do not feel like surrender, because whole muscle cuts carry fewer cross-lot risks than ground products. Canned fish and beans bridge a week without sacrificing protein, and a digital thermometer culture at home turns guesswork into numbers with 165 degrees Fahrenheit as a non-negotiable for poultry and reheats. Even so, separate boards and knives for raw and ready foods break the silent pathways we watch in outbreaks, and swap smart, not scared. On the other hand, accountability is not a fight, but a process when you bring patterns, because a calm conversation with a store manager armed with photos of codes, dates, and receipts lands better than anger, and sending those same codes to state hotlines adds a dot to the map that helps other families, while private labels will keep changing wrappers unless customers read the stamp that does not change. As a consequence of this, reputation follows metal, not marketing, and plant codes cut through branding. Even so, the broader map brings us back to where we started, because Texas is the bellwether that sends signals across supply chains, feeding 45 states, and corrective action plans, negative lot testing, and re-inspections are the only real endings to a recall beyond a press line, while the same speed versus safety pressure we saw in fast food kitchens has a twin at the sealer in the hot case. What many did not see coming is that pace is the common ingredient, and the pattern won't stop itself. However, the final turn belongs to the shopper, who connects dots faster than headlines, because a receipt with a code and a date is a map of your week, and the 9 meats we traced are not a list to memorize, but a logic to apply wherever you buy and wherever you cook next. Even so, the simplest habit closes the widest gap when you pause, read, photograph, and act without panic. And what will your receipt reveal tonight?